The thinking distortions are your brain's version of a photo filter. So when you take a picture and you put a filter on it, it makes it look different than how the original image was captured. You can do the same thing with thinking distortions. So a situation can take place, but your brain will use these filters to make the situation look different to you than it might look to somebody else. Here's some examples of what each of these might look like in real life with someone who has an anxious attachment style. So polarized thinking is taking extreme positions with little regard for neutrality or middle ground. Loyalty is very important to me. I keep score in relationships. So this is how someone with an anxious attachment would use polarized thinking. So polarized thinking is, very, very extreme in how they think. So there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And they don't have a lot of empathy or understanding for how somebody else might experience the same reality different than them. Mental filtering is only acknowledging evidence that supports what you already believe. So if somebody with an anxious attachment style was using this, they might say, my core belief is that people will leave me. So I only pay attention to evidence that supports this belief and I ignore the efforts of others. So when someone has an anxious attachment style and they're suffering with an abandonment wound that tells them that no matter what, they're going to end up alone, they will filter out nice things that people do for them. They'll filter out ways in which people are loyal to them, and they're only going to be able to see the evidence that supports this belief that I'm going to be left. And what happens is sometimes they end up in a self-fulfilling prophecy by becoming so anxious about these thoughts that people will leave me, that they then become demanding of the relationships, and the people do leave them, which only then furthers this belief. See, I knew it. People were going to leave me anyways. This keeps me safe because I can anticipate and control outcomes. So somebody who has difficulty living in the present and accepting that sometimes you have good outcomes and sometimes you have bad outcomes might live with this very strict style of thinking. So they will think things like, people should be respectful to others. You should follow the traffic rules. And so when they're in traffic and somebody doesn't, they have no flexibility in their thinking for why someone might break a traffic rule, and they become triggered or angry. Because again, they didn't anticipate that, and their goal is to be able to control outcomes. So discomfort and uncertainty and things that are unexpected cause a big reaction from somebody who has an anxious attachment style or just uses one of these thinking distortions. Next up is personalization. This is believing that everything others do and say is a reaction to you. So an anxious person might make a lot of assumptions about the intentions of others. And so they might say, well, you just did that because, and then they'll fill in the blank, usually with something negative that supports, some of these other beliefs that, people don't love me, people don't respect me. And again, with this anxious attachment style, there's this need or this emotional reasoning is turning feelings into facts. I'm scared, therefore I must be in danger. This one took me a long time to understand because it kind of creeps into your thinking at times when you don't realize it. Emotional reasoning, turning feelings into fact. I'm scared, therefore I must be in danger. So sometimes you get anxiety and you feel scared even when there is no presence of danger. And so emotional reasoning tells you that your feelings equal fact. So I'm mad, so therefore I hit them. It's giving justification sometimes for your behavior because of your feelings. So in this case, someone with an anxious attachment style might say, because of my past, I assume that if I'm feeling insecure, it's because they've done something wrong. So in relationships, emotional reasoning will often start fights between two people because the person will use the fact that they don't feel connected or close to their partner as evidence that their partner has done something wrong. when sometimes the lack of emotional connection is due to the person's anxiety. Their anxiety is causing them to shoot way out into the future and start to future tell, so they're not being present in their relationship, which leaves them feeling insecure or disconnected. And then they make that mean, see, my partner has done something wrong, or this relationship is not right for me. So that's another example of emotional reasoning. So you're using your feelings, how you're feeling, to make that mean something about your environment. Mind reading is jumping to conclusions based on assumptions without evidence. So this person says, I jump to a lot of conclusions about the future and about what other people are thinking. So sometimes the anxious person will use this as a protective measure. So if I can try and guess or anticipate what another person is thinking, then I can mold my response to prevent danger, to prevent disconnection, any of those things. The problem with that kind of coping is that it ends up seeming calculated. And when you're calculated in a relationship, it prevents you from being vulnerable and present in building that connection with another person, whether it's a friend or a romantic partner or a boss or a colleague or anything really. Minimization is devaluing a personal achievement or dismissing the impact of your behavior. So someone who is, very depressed and thinks that they're not good at things, and someone says, oh my gosh, you got that amazing award at work, they might say, oh, everyone gets that, or, it wasn't that big of a deal, I had a lot of help on that project. Someone who is using it to dismiss the impact of their behavior, if someone comes to tell them, oh, you really hurt my feelings, they might say something like, it wasn't that big of a deal, or it was just a joke. So they'll use minimization in that way. The anxious person might disregard their resources and their positive experiences with others. So they have this belief, I'm not safe. And so they'll minimize all their experiences that tell them they are able to keep themselves safe and reasonably reach for resources when they need them. Magnification is exaggerating mistakes or events. This is also known as catastrophic thinking. So they might overestimate the risk of getting hurt. That's it, we should break up. So this is what it might look like in a relationship. And so if they have a small fight or a small argument, they may constantly shoot to this thinking of we should break up. So they're magnifying this event to make it mean something greater than it might. This can also look like thinking things are going to go awful. So if you have a meeting coming up at work, I'm going to do terribly. I'm not going to be able to perform. So you're magnifying or exaggerating the probability that something is going to go terribly wrong. Overgeneralization is making broad conclusions based on a single event. And so this person, I take a single event and make broad conclusions. This will always be this way. And so that keeps you in an insecure state of thinking if you believe things will always be this way, because that cuts out your motivation to continue trying different things. Labeling is assigning labels to self and others. An example, calling yourself lazy for resting. And so this person who has an anxious attachment, they might assign people and experiences as good and bad as a shortcut to keep themselves safe. And so if this person does something that makes you uncomfortable, they get labeled as a bad person, they get placed in the bad box. It makes it easier for them to keep themselves safe, or they think they're keeping themselves safe. The problem is that people are multifaceted, and good people make mistakes and do bad things. So if they get placed in the bad box accidentally because this person isn't having a very flexible style of thinking, then that could prevent them from having relationships, and it could also shrink their world. So if they're constantly labeling others, then they're going to end up with a very, very small world, which can then, make them feel unlovable, uncapable, or just I'm not enough. And then they don't understand why, but oftentimes it comes back to these thinking distortions and the way that they're interpreting how these different events are happening to them in their lives.